Good day, folks. Today I'm going to be asking you to explore the ways that we persuade people of something. So for your essay that's coming up in Motorcycles and Sweetgrass, and for your practice one that you're going to do before that for me, I'm going to ask you to write a persuasive essay. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. What we're going to do today is take a look at some of the tools that we use to do that. So if you haven't already watched the introductory video, Introduction to Rhetoric, please pause at this point and do that, and then come back here. And then we're going to take a look at some of the tools that we use. So you'll notice that we're in our content section here, and this is under the General Resources Useful All Semester section. I haven't put it to student view so you can see something that I've been working on but haven't quite finished. So anyway, here is our content related to this, and I'm going to make it nice and big so we can see it. And we'll talk about, first of all, what is rhetoric? It's basically the set of tools that we can use to persuade someone to agree with our opinion, to do what we want them to do, or to stop doing what we wish they would not do. So these are the tools that we all use, some of us more or less instinctively, and some of us with a lot more planning and forethought, when we're trying to convince other people to change their behavior in some way, or to change their ideas. All of these tools have been in use for as long as people have tried to change one another's minds or behavior. So basically since the first human being met another human being. Two Greek philosophers are credited with noticing and naming them, which is why their names are all in Greek. Aristotle identified the first three, and he gave them the names of ethos, pathos, and logos. Protagoras added the fourth, kairos, later. And again, these are just the names that these philosophers gave to something that they noticed that people were already doing. So they didn't create these things. They just identified and named them. And having done that, they began training people in their use. Sometimes the term rhetoric is used insultingly to suggest that the writing or speech it refers to lacks sincerity or meaning and is merely intended to manipulate. It has also been called dangerous. In the wrong hands, skilled use of rhetoric can convince people of heinous untruths and drive them to commit actions that they would otherwise be unlikely to do. So these tools are powerful and potentially dangerous. Whatever your moral position on it, you would be well served to understand rhetoric so you can recognize when someone is using it on you, and so you can, if you want to, use it yourself. In truth, it's almost impossible not to use it if you're trying to convince someone of something. It seems to come naturally to most of us to some degree or another. So here are the four tools, and you'll see that we've got an accordion going on here. And I'm going to pop these open one at a time. So the first one is ethos. What is it? It's the use of the author's reputation to convince the audience that the author is trustworthy and therefore should be believed and followed. And when I say author here, I'm referring to someone who's written something. So if you're writing an essay, you're the author, but also to someone who has prepared to speak. So someone who has written a speech and then either that person or someone else gets up and delivers it is also the author of the speech. So we're trying to convince and in the case where someone has written the speech and someone else is delivering it, more than likely we're hiding that fact and we're trying to convince people that the speaker is trustworthy and should be believed and followed. So here are some examples of ethos. First of all, the use of credentials. So calling yourself doctor, professor, etc., any kind of an earned title that you have. If you use that, then you're telling people, look, I have earned this, and this is why you should trust me. Mentions of your good works and accomplishments. Basically, people tend to want to believe and follow good people. So if you can prove that you're a good person, you're going to attract more people to want to do what you say. Okay, they're going to have more faith that you're leading them down a good path. Signing your name with a list of your degrees and affiliations. So once you have finished school and perhaps you've got some certification of some kind, either another degree or you've earned a journeyman certificate in some trade or whatever the case is, if you put those letters that represent your degree, your certificate, etc., after your name, that's a sign that you're trying to assert your ethos, your credibility. Now, because we tend as a society not to love people who praise themselves, another form of ethos is having your words introduced by someone else who praises you. So you'll see this in a lot of cases where there's a speaker, someone else will come in and say wonderful things about that speaker to introduce them and then invite them on the stage, and the speaker will deliver their message. That's a form of ethos. You'll see this in books sometimes too. If a respected person has been asked to write an introduction to a book, that's usually going to be praising the author and the wonders of the author and why you should believe what the author has written. So that's another form of ethos. But sometimes it can get more subtle. So in an office or other workplace, hanging your framed degrees and certifications on your wall is a form of ethos. When I walk into my mechanic's office, I can see all of his certificates for not only the fact that he is a mechanic, but any additional training that he's had, specializations, and so on. Same thing in my dentist's office. I see his degree as a dentist, and then I see all of his different credentials for various extra training that he's taken. So this is when a customer walks into a workplace, these kinds of certifications tell the customer, oh, the person who works here is competent and has had their abilities kind of given a stamp of approval by an important organization. So that's a form of ethos. Wearing nice clothes is a form of ethos because people tend to believe, subconsciously rather than consciously for most of us, people tend to believe and respect those who are attractive and who've presented themselves well, more so than people who have not. Taking care of your personal appearance is another thing. So if you show up to a job interview with greasy hair and dirty hands, you're going to be less persuasive in the interview than if you show up clean and well groomed. Even smelling good, or at least inoffensive, is a form of ethos, because I don't know if you've ever had an interaction with someone who's not smelling so good that day. Either they've got body odor, or maybe they didn't use their mouthwash that morning, or whatever the case may be. You're going to have a tendency to want to limit your contact with that person, to want to get away from them, and to therefore not listen to what they're saying to you. So there's an entire industry, several industries around making us smell good. Mouthwash, deodorant, perfume, cologne, toothpaste. All of these things are helping us to manage our odor and thereby adding to our ethos and making us more compelling for other people to be around, or at least to not want to avoid. Okay, so that is ethos. And this is all about understanding who is delivering the message. Next comes one that is huge in advertising, politics, and marketing, and that is pathos. That is the use of emotion to persuade. And this is where rhetoric can often get a little bit more manipulative looking. So some examples of pathos. One is to use personal stories that are designed to evoke a particular emotion. So if you want your listener to be feeling pity for you so that they will give you money, you might tell a story about the hard times that you're going through. If you want your listener to feel uplifted by you, then you're going to share stories of your triumphs and potentially, suggest to them that if you follow me, you can have these triumphs as well. Whatever the emotion is that you're looking for, these are some tools that you could use to evoke it. Use of images that pull for an emotional response. So if you've ever, watched ads, you'll sometimes see a picture of a thin and sad child used to encourage donations to a charity to eliminate hunger. Basically, we look at the picture of this child and we just want to make them feel better. And we want them to help them to look healthier. So we're going to send our money to that charity that's going to help to eliminate hunger. There are much more subtle ways of using pathos as well. Use of music in the background of a speech or a video helps to evoke a mood in the audience. And so the speaker is going to decide what music to have playing in the background with an eye to what mood they're hoping to evoke. And music is actually very powerful in touching our emotions. Similarly, use of color in a stage setting, website, or print ad will pull emotions from viewers. And there's an entire industry related to understanding and using the emotional effects of color. And this can extend too back towards ethos, to what the speaker is wearing in a presentation. The colors that they've chosen to wear are going to evoke a particular feeling in the reader or in the listener. And they probably have chosen that on purpose. Attempts to induce guilt are common in families. So, for example, if you really cared about my safety, you'd get me a newer, more reliable phone. This one's not even going to make a call if I'm in trouble. That's the kind of manipulation that you can use on someone who already has an emotional connection to you. Guilt doesn't tend to work very well. And in fact, attempts to try and induce it tend to backfire unless you already have a close relationship with someone. But within a family or within a close relationship of any kind, friendship, even like a couple's relationship, guilt can be a very effective tool. And that would be using pathos when you're trying to make someone feel guilty to change their behavior. And then one that is also sadly effective is inducing fear. So you'll see this in any kind of personal safety industry. So you make people scared of burglars in their neighborhood so you can sell them a home alarm and security system. Make them scared that they're going to be mugged or physically attacked in some way, and then you can sell them self-defense classes. Okay, so these are the types of tools of pathos. And of the three, this is in some ways both the cheapest and the most effective, because most of us don't recognize terribly well when someone is manipulating our emotions unless they do it poorly. If you do this transparently and poorly, it upsets people. But if you do it subtly and people don't realize it's happening, it is incredibly effective. All right, so that is pathos. And then the last one, this is the one that usually your teachers are trying to get you to use. This is the one that we all wish the world operated with, and this is logos, the use of logic, facts, or reason to persuade. So some examples of what this looks like is if you're writing an essay and you quote a scholarly article or a scientific paper. Now you're using the words of an expert who has studied the field that you're looking at and has done some research to bolster, citing a textbook, using numbers, graphs, and statistics, and references to specific historical or recent events that are verifiable and true and proven. These are all examples of logos. As is, this is where it gets a little bit less facts and figure-y, presenting your ideas clearly with organization and logic so that we all know what thought process went into the ideas, or so that the ideas that go together are kind of in the same place, and the piece that you're trying to either write or speak flows in a way that just makes sense. So the audience isn't sitting there scratching their heads trying to figure out, how did we get from there to here? I don't understand the connection. If it all flows logically and you've got your arguments and your facts that support the arguments together and it all connects up neatly, that is also a form of logos. As I mentioned, this form of persuasion often works better than the others on teachers, or at least that's what we would like to believe. Never doubt, though, that both ethos and pathos work on teachers too. Okay? And then the last one, this is the one that Protagoras came up with later. And it's a little bit of a different style, is kairos. Kairos, what it means is the right moment. And it refers to delivering your message at the right time, in the right place, and to the right audience to achieve what you want to achieve. So here are some examples. Let's say that you want a raise or a promotion. If you have just heard your boss shouting at someone on the phone and they've slammed down the telephone and you've heard them slamming drawers in their office, now is not the time to walk in and ask for a raise. I think most of us know that instinctively. If we don't, we need to hear, now is not the time to walk in and ask for a raise. You're going to wait till maybe your boss has just come back from a business meeting and is looking happy and pleased with the way things went. that is the perfect time to walk in and say, hey, I think I've been doing really well. Here are the reasons that I think I need a raise, or here's this position that I would like you to support me for so that I can move up in the business. So you want to choose your time to do that. If you have a problem that you think the government should solve, figure out which level of government handles it and send your message to the right representative. There's no point in complaining to the prime minister if your garbage doesn't get picked up, because he has no control over that. The city manages garbage pickup. So if you've got a problem with your garbage, you need to call the city. And you need to know who within the city to call for that. That might even take some research. But there is absolutely, no matter how well you craft a message, there's absolutely no point in delivering that message to someone who has no power to do anything about it. You need to choose the right audience. And then in terms of choosing the right time, in horrible terms, sometimes this involves having a message ready to go and waiting until the right moment to deliver it. For example, in the United States, a politician might wait for the next mass shooting, and unfortunately we probably believe there will be one, before putting forward a new law for stricter gun control. And in the political context in the United States, we've seen over the last several years how resistant that system is to any increase in gun control. So if that's something that you want to achieve, you're going to need to pick your moment to put that forward carefully, because it has failed many times in the past. So we know that there's resistance. So we need to choose our moment. On a happier note, the wise child waits until right after they've been praised for doing something good to name the birthday present they wish for. Okay? So that is what Kairos is all about, choosing your right time, right place, and right audience to achieve what you want to achieve. In terms of right place, I didn't really talk about this, but this is also about thinking about who else is around and what position you're putting the person you're asking in. I have a vivid memory of something that was truly cringeworthy when I was in high school. Our semi-formal was coming up, and a male friend of mine walked up to a group of 5 girls, and he asked one of them to be his date for the semi-formal. And she said no. And then he immediately turned to another one in the group and asked her. And she said no. And he went through this group of 5 girls, one after the other, asked every single one of them if they would be his date to the semi-formal. Now, I happen to know that the 5th girl he asked probably would have actually liked to go with him, but she now knows that she's the 5th girl that he's asked, and she's just seen 4 of her friends say no. And so she's not going to say yes in that circumstance. Even so, think about, putting the person that you're asking something of in a situation, or finding them in a situation that is more conducive to them being willing to say yes. Okay, so that's Kairos. So let's talk again about the power of rhetoric. Someone exceptionally skilled in rhetoric can convince an audience of the truth of his or her words, whether or not they are in fact true. Skilled rhetoric is invisible. The audience, without a sustained effort to see it, will fail to realize that it's being used on them, and they will therefore look past the rhetoric to the message that it's being used to craft, and they will approve of that message. Someone who is unskilled in rhetoric, no matter how brilliant and correct, may never be heard or read. Bad or absent rhetoric is visible, and it blocks the message that the writer or speaker is attempting to deliver. And there is a centuries-long tradition of using rhetoric, and an equally long tradition of objecting to its use by suggesting that it is immoral and deceptive. Politicians, lawyers, and marketers are usually experts in rhetoric, and they're often despised for it. Now, the reason I'm teaching you these tools is, first of all, because for centuries, other people have known them, and they will be used on you. And probably unconsciously, you're using them yourself. So you should probably try to take control of them. For those of you who want to delve deeper, here are some specific rhetorical devices. They're more specific tools of rhetoric. They're all named in Greek as well. And if you decide to use them, the point is not what their name in Greek is. The point is using the skill. to be aware of them, know how to recognize when they're being used on you, and know how to use them yourself. This is where we get really deep into the sneakiness of rhetoric. Some of these are really quite manipulative. And note that there are many more rhetorical devices than the ones that are discussed here. This is just a sampling. If you were to search rhetorical devices on the internet, you might get the impression that there is some specific number of them. I've seen websites that say, here are the 31 rhetorical devices, or the 4, or the 12, or the 20, depending on which author you choose to consult. And it's probably a waste of your time to try and discover the true number and try and find them all. But I just included here a few that are worthy of discussion. And one thing I want to throw out here, all literary devices double as rhetorical devices. They all help to deliver your message. So keep that in mind. And that is a set of tools that are already kind of in your toolkit. I've not included those here, but we've already talked about them. So you can always keep those in mind. And then we can see that this is a really, really, really long list. And here are some of the things that I consulted in order to make my point. All right. So one that I would like you to be fairly familiar with, though, is parallelism, because this is just really, this is good writing style. What this is using similar grammar structure, sounds, or meter to emphasize a point and to add rhythm or balance to a sentence or paragraph. So sometimes when there's an opportunity for parallelism and you've missed it, I might point that out to you. Here's an example of parallelism from Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. Okay, so that's a fairly complex sentence, but you'll notice that through it, he's got a lot of parallels. So it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. He could have said instead, it was the best of times, it was also pretty lousy. That doesn't have the same ring to it because the parallelism is broken. It was the age of wisdom. People were running around like fools. Again, you've lost the opportunity for parallelism that was there. So when you are trying to compare two things or you're trying to list something, if you can use grammatically parallel structure, it often will strengthen your writing. So that's the only one I'm really going to go into right now. Although I like this pair, maybe I'll mention these two as well, dysphomism and euphemism. Euphemism is the one that we're more familiar with maybe. It's using a more pleasant or gentler word rather than something more direct but upsetting. And it's used to talk about an upsetting topic without making your audience too emotional and driving them away. It can also be used to distance yourself from a negative admission. So for example, using passed away instead of died is a euphemism. The situation is regrettable instead of I'm sorry is another euphemism. Dysphomism is the opposite, and it's something that a lot of people don't know about or use as much as euphemism, but it can also be pretty effective. It's an unpleasant or insulting word or phrase substituted for something more familiar and neutral. It can actually be quite offensive, but you don't have to go that far to make your point. So for example, if you call something a greasy spoon instead of a diner, you're giving this sense that maybe you don't actually want to eat there. Definitely, we still know it's a diner. If you call someone a shrink instead of a psychiatrist, you're suggesting that you perhaps don't have that much respect for either them or their profession. That's dysphonism. And there's a lot of ways that that gets used as well. All right, so we're going to stop it there. If you feel like delving into some of these others, they're all here, and you can take your time and take a look at them. All right. Thank you for that today.